Good afternoon. Thank you all for coming and joining us for another edition of Thinkcurity. My name is Jeff De Domenico, and hopefully I'll do a pretty good job of spending most of my time steering our wonderful guest panel. I work with three hats currently at Track Force Valiant, certainly as a brand ambassador, someone that is greatly involved in the client relations side of our business and the C-suites, and most importantly, trying to ascertain data, intelligence, and content that's part of the what's next story. Today is a great example of that, in that we've got three wonderful guests that'll be speaking to us intimately with actionable intelligence in the drone universe and how to use them in a way that secures our people and our assets, and most importantly, will allow for you to understand what you can do next about this topic. And so we're going to touch four basic areas, which is obviously very important to this subject matter, and that's navigating the FAA regulations. Got an expert on that. The benefits of drone integration, whether that be integrating that with your physical security and the man guarding side or access control or other. Seamless technology integration, obviously, as the convergence of man and machine continue to accelerate, that will be incumbent upon us to bring these data points together and deliver that in a managed service solution, which is what most of our audience is interested in. Of course, success stories are always great because we build upon them and we create them based upon past successes. So without taking more time from our great guests, we've got three of them. We're going to start with Ryan Smith, the CEO and founder of Titan Protection. He'll turn it over to Charlie Werner, who's an industry expert and thought leader in our space in public service. And of course, Miriam Foxx, who is a captain in the Chula Vista Police Department and also a subject matter expert, and excited to hear her feedback on how law enforcement is utilizing that. So Ryan, starting with you, intros please, and we'll buzz the tower real fast and get into the content.
Sure. No, excited to be here. And you can hear me okay, Jeff?
Perfectly.
Awesome. Thank you. Well, again, super excited to be here, especially with industry giants such as Captain Foxx and Chief Werner in the drone as a first responder, and think it was very well to kind of put these things together, as it's seeing a lot of adoption in the public safety space and then how we transition that into the private sector. And for me personally, something I've been very passionate about, two things, aviation and physical security. So being able to put those together has been exciting. I started as a security officer when I was 18, did that through college and worked in law enforcement for about 12 years, and then started Titan Protection in 2008. So I've had my foot in the physical security world and law enforcement since then. I'm 45 now and have been doing this ever since I was 18. But the aviation side, that started for me as a child. My grandfather was the deputy director of the FAA. Was kind of an idol of mine growing up. Aviation was just a big part of my life and something that I was interested in. I took my first flying lesson when I was 14 and have tinkered with that my whole life, but have been a private instrument rated pilot. And so being able to put aviation and security together is what gets me out of bed. So I appreciate you having me on. Excited to be here.
Charlie, all you can, there you go.
Hey, thanks everybody for coming today, and Jeff, thanks for the opportunity to be here to join this distinguished panel. I just want to say I'm the retired fire chief from Charlottesville, Virginia. I spent 37 years in the fire service. During that time, I always was involved in technology. I also spent 2 years as a reserve deputy, and I too, along with being a firefighter, working the hours we worked, was a security officer for a number of years as well. So I have kind of a mixed batch of experiences. But when I retired, I went to work for the Virginia Department of Emergency Management, as their acting deputy state coordinator, and again was involved in technology, integrating, starting a drone program, integrating GIS, and doing some other technology items. And then in 2019 started Drone Responders, which is droneresponders.org, which is an organization basically to advance the technology in public safety US, but for that matter, in any industry, to be helpful, because a lot of the information we have is applicable to a lot of different agencies. And I'm just proud to say that as of last week, we went over 10,000 members, and we are now the largest and leading nonprofit program to advance public safety US in the world.
So glad to have you, Charlie. Thank you. Miriam, it's up to you, and let's hear it, because that's actually how I met Charlie, and I thank you for that.
Well, good morning here in California. Good
Yeah.
afternoon for some of you. My name is Miriam Foxx. I'm a captain here at the Chula Vista Police Department. We're located in beautiful Chula Vista, California, which is in San Diego County. I have been with the department almost 26 years. Prior to my life here at the police department, I was in the United States Navy, active in reserve. I retired after 22 years in 2012. How I got involved in the drone program, I put in for our strategic operations lieutenant position back in 2021, and that position covered a whole various amounts of positions and responsibilities and duties, including being a lieutenant over our Drones First Responder program. And as many of you may know, Drones First Responder, Chula Vista PD, we started that program. It was really unique. We actually launch drones in pre-positioned areas in the city, and we respond to actual calls for service, and we live stream the footage to our officers, to our fire department as well. And it's an awesome tool, great tool, hugely successful. We went over 20,000 missions. The program's been live since 2018, and it's hard to put a value on it, but it's been hugely successful, and we know it's saving lives in our organization, our officers, the community members, and the subjects we're contacting. So it's a great tool. I'm excited to talk about it, and I'm happy to be here.
That's great. Thank you all today. I wanted to start with one, though, that usually scares people away from this topic, which is the FAA regulations. Obviously, this is not like just hanging a camera from a building. It's not like going to Costco and picking up your Ring camera. This is a lot more complex. Charlie, I'm going to guess that both you and Miriam have some experiences in that, but I wanted to start with that and just bring people up to date as best you can on what's impending from that standpoint on that subject.
Yeah, well, I think one of the things that we've seen is public safety often leads the way, because we're able to do things when regulations are being evaluated, because there's a look at the risk versus the benefit. Chula Vista was truly a groundbreaking phenomenon in the integration pilot project that was started by the FAA. But even then, when they were showing such great success early on, we were having trouble moving it forward. And I remember trying to advance it with other departments, and the FAA said, no, that's part of the IPP. And so I had to pull up the executive order and read to them line item number 4, which says after they have been proven concept, the next idea is to transfer that into other locations around the country so that we actually have accomplished something. What I want to say now is that the FAA regulations are changing dramatically for the good. We're seeing that now they have an understanding of risks, which are relatively small when it comes to the small UAS in the industry. If you look at aviation in general, they have the FAA has like an acceptable number of deaths from aviation is 300. More than 300 in a year is determined to be catastrophic. Given that, we've had no serious injuries, no deaths, no major crashes that have occurred from drones. So now the FAA is looking at it from a whole different perspective. But they've taken the drones as first responder, for example. Now they're also looking at technology as to what do the technologies offer and how can we do some of this avoidance. But one of the things that's really important is the ability to fly beyond visual line of sight, which is one of the things that we often need to cover some of the facilities. Would be the same thing for security. Sometimes you need to go beyond visual line of sight to cover an entire facility. And now what we've seen, one great example is obstructed shielding waivers, which now allow beyond visual line of sight as long as your system will take you, as long as you're within 50 feet of the highest obstacle. That could be the ground, the building, or a tower. So that's dramatically changing. And then we're seeing the technology being accepted by the FAA, like in Pearland, Texas, where they're using the Cassia G, the Iris Cassia G as a detection capability, along with some other stuff. And now we just saw recently that in Manatee, Florida, They've given the go-ahead and approved a waiver to go without a visual observer if you're in controlled airspace, Class B airspace, without a human visual observer for the first time, just by using ADS-B in, which means that you're using that tracking technology that's required in a Class B space. So we're starting to see a lot of this technology change to where it's now making the things that Chula Vista has done as an example being expanded to many other police departments and fire departments around the country, but now also starting to see that transition to the security world.
Right, right. Miriam, you were really early in this process, so I would imagine with budgets tight and fairly risk-averse organizations as a general rule, was it Charlie that helped you assess some of those regulatory challenges, and what was the early stages like? And then you can also talk a little bit about whether or not anything that was inclusive of a private relationship, whether that be at the current level or otherwise.
Oh, that's a great question. And our program started in 2018 officially, but really started in 2017 with a lot of outreach, public forums, reaching out to our civic groups to get input and reaching out to the community. I was not a part of the program at that time, but I know we did have some partnerships with a consultant and one of our then now retired captains, Fritz Reber, who's well known in the drone world. He was a drone enthusiast and kind of brought the idea forward with another retired captain, Captain Vern Salee. And so they took this crazy idea to my chief, and my chief is big on public safety, making sure our officers are safe and giving them the tools that they need. And she's also very forward thinking. So she was the one that said, you know what, let's do this. So I'm thankful because we have a chief, Chief Roxana Kennedy, that's like willing to try something and put, and, as a chief of police and Charles will know he's the chief of a fire department, they have to kind of take those risks to get that reward. And so my chief was forward thinking and very innovative in that. Early on, we had several partnerships, but it was basically really just looking at it and taking a chance and redirecting resources internally because we didn't have city funding. And so we do have a pretty robust police foundation, the Chula Vista Police Foundation. They paid for most of our program, and we just borrowed officers from other places in the police department to get the program started. Because and many city agencies, leadership will know, a lot of cities, elected officials, before they get funding, they want to see proof of concept. So we actually didn't get funding for the staffing until 2021. So that was really interesting. So sometimes you have to just take a chance, test it out, see if you can show the proof, show the success stories, which we started showing success stories, getting with our media and putting out those stories to show this was a benefit and we were doing it correctly and we were being transparent with our community.
Wow. That's really informative and great nuggets for those that feel as though, this is too much for me to do. It's too politically charged, too much regulation. I don't want to get involved. So that's really
I just want to add something to what Miriam said. The other thing is I was able to join and work with Chula Vista, and I went to the collective IPP meeting where we were trying to get some more capabilities and another waiver through. And we had this discussion. The FA said, look, you've covered the airspace concerns, but we still have to look at the risk on the ground. And I was able to say, no, you don't. And they said, what do you mean? I said, well, because we in these type of situations own the perimeter. And they were like, oh, and I see that very similar to security, is that now you're going to be flying in the flight over people, and those kind of things can only be done if the people are aware and you're flying the right aircraft. So that changed the whole dynamic from the FA's perspective. They said, well, you've covered the bases.
Wow, that's great. Ryan, having said that and having modeled something similar with the video monitoring and the cameras, of course, maybe you can share a little bit about how that dynamic has sped up, that past experience of camera monitoring person, if you will, has sped up, and how the drone adaptation might happen at a faster speed.
Yeah, that conversation has accelerated rapidly over the past honestly 6 months to 12 months in particular. I started going down this path in 2016, and the two things that are needed for this to work are the beyond visual line of sight capabilities and a drone in a box. For DFR, most of what I'm seeing is patrol-led DFR, where a police officer rolls to a scene, pops a trunk, a drone's in an air, and then they're flying it. On the security side, we need the autonomy if we had to have somebody in place to visually fly the aircraft or change the batteries, it really doesn't save us anything or give us any ROI. So that beyond visual line of sight was everything. And as we've seen that kind of accelerate, that's where we've jumped in kind of head first. And Chief Warner's correct. The risk assessment for the security application is much different, because usually, it's fenced in, we're flying where people aren't supposed to be, and the mere presence of a person may be something that would trigger action or something of that sense. So DFR, I think, as that advances, being able to free the officers up so that the aircraft can fly on its own. If you have 3 officers respond to a scene, one of them has to fly the drone, you really have 2 officers, where now the drone in the box allows them to have 3 officers back in the fight, so to speak. But it also introduces a level of complexity that we may not have to face in the private sector, and that's flying over people long distances. And I think the FAA is trying to navigate through that more complex. I think they're less concerned now with, is the drone going to crash and hit somebody, as we're going to have a bunch of drones flying around, and how do we communicate and have that air traffic, move and not hit each other. But yes, that conversation has accelerated rapidly in the past year in particular.
Great. So we talked about regulations. We've talking about use cases. So I want to dive in. Charlie, you had a slew of use cases. That's the first thing you spoke to me about when we had our initial conversation. When Miriam introduced you to me, you said, hey, we've got these little buckets of opportunities, and they come at us on a regular basis, but we've got to prove the thesis, right? We've got to make that work. And so maybe you can share one or two, one perhaps with law enforcement, as you've done with Miriam, and then what that use case looks like. And then we can pivot to Miriam to see whether or not that was rigorous for her to be able to perform. And then Ryan, maybe you can comment on whether or not you've had any cases that might fit in our world.
Yeah, well, interestingly enough, I wrote the first article, I think in 2015, saying I think there might be 7 use cases for public safety. We did a survey, we found that there are over 50 use cases now. We have 7 use cases in wildfire operations alone.
Wow.
But just to give an example, one of the things we worked with Chula Vista on again was the tactical beyond visual line of sight waiver. And that was to allow us to fly over and around buildings in dangerous situations. And we had gone through different names. It was the close proximity, low altitude. It was the COVID waiver. It was the dangerous mission waiver. And of course, in the end, the FAA came up with their own name, was the tactical beyond visual line of sight waiver. So they've got to have their own name on it.
Right.
But that was being able to fly within 50 feet of a building and then fly anywhere that we needed to, which led later to turn into the obstructed shielding waiver, which expands it greatly. But that was something that we proved the case on, and again showed benefit versus risk. And again, in a shooter situation, we own that perimeter. Under the fire side, I would say that there's so many different ways it's being used, but one of the biggest ones that I see is in hazmat operations. In Southern Manatee, Florida, Fire Rescue's done a great example. They don't send their people into that hazmat situation until they've assessed it with a drone. They can use it to detect and identify the chemical or the released product. They can use it to see what the actual problem is. Is it a leaking valve? Is it a cracked thing? Is there fire? So they know the hazards before they go in. And then as they get in there, in the past, when you're in these encapsulated suits, you have very limited time. And so if they needed a tool, they'd have to go out to the warm zone. And again, that would reduce the amount of time they could work. Now the drone can actually drop a tool close by where they can do the operation without stopping. And then last, the drone can fly and monitor and watch the operation. Should something change in the conditions, and immediately alert those technicians we're working on the hazmat situations. And now we're seeing DFR expand out into delivery defibrillators, Narcan, tourniquets. And so the world is dramatically changing in front of us.
That's great. And Miriam, once, you're in a position, right, where you got to get funding. I always say no money, no mission. And so now you got that money, you got some public enthusiasm, which is another outreach that you do. Obviously, I've heard a lot about that. And now you gotta prove the thesis, right? So tell me, when that early rollout, who ran it? Was there a project manager? What kind of reporting? How did you do that?
Well, initially, because we were part of the IPP, the Integration Pilot Program at the FAA put on, we had a lieutenant that was actually had other duties and reassigned to kind of work this project in addition with the actual UAS committee that we had. And it was several officers that were enthusiasts with drones and got their Part 107. And so we kind of just had think tank meetings to kind of talk about and talk out how DFR was going to look like and what it was going to look like. Initially, we had officers on the rooftop, and obviously that's so expensive. And those officers with those skills need to be out in the field. So we
Right.
then, started using a vendor, a contractor to kind of staff the rooftops, with the pilots to be able to have that airspace awareness and to make sure the drone was airworthy and ready. And
Sure.
so initially it was just kind of talking out the ideas and practicing and testing it out and see what worked. So initially
Right.
we had an officer that would fly it from the rooftop with an RC. And
Right.
when we were working with the vendor to develop that telepresence, teleoperating software, that's how we kind of transitioned to where the actual officer becomes the incident commander in the DFR room and is able to control the drone and direct the officers that are responding and be able to set up perimeters and give information because they have a fuller picture of what's going on, and
Sure.
also communicate with dispatch and communicate with nearby law enforcement helicopters if need be. So it kind of it took some time, but it definitely expanded to what it is and what it was.
Right.
I know Ryan mentioned earlier about the drone in the box solution. We all feel it's going to be the future. I know for a lot of the agencies, the cost is a concern.
Mhm.
So hopefully that cost is mitigated somehow, especially with some of the challenges with what type of equipment you're using, what type of drone they're using. So that's
Sure.
definitely gonna be something that we're looking forward to. We want to take the person off the rooftop, and we want the regulation and everything to catch up, and the equipment and the cost to all catch up to where it's feasible and affordable for law enforcement agencies.
Yeah, that's perfectly said, and that's the reason why I'm such a big fan. I call it PPP. Everyone got that with the loans for COVID, but I think the public-private partnerships are what it's about. You've just clearly articulated one example of that, which now leads to Ryan. Ryan, so someone's got to pay the bill, and
Right.
there's got to be some ROI analysis that's done. In the early phases, right, it was one camera represent how many law enforcement or security hours. What does that drone in the box look like as it pertains to, again, not asking you to give away any ingredients to the cake because you're a forerunner in this, but tell us a little bit about the structure and how you might position that with either your local law enforcement or a client.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, the challenge, and I think in our industry, it's very similar to remote video monitoring and some of the other technological advances we're seeing is it's always benchmarked against the guard, right? It's how much does it cost us to either do nothing or put a security officer in place, and then how is it effective from there? The main barriers for us have been the beyond visual line of sight waivers. It becomes very costly and very cumbersome when you have to go client by client and get a waiver. The FAA and two, we've talked about Part 107 and beyond visual line of sight. Part 107 is what the FAA uses to govern drone flight right now. And that's with a pilot on the ground flying it, you have to maintain visual line of sight. That presents a challenge for us because we want the autonomy of the drone to fly by itself. They're in the process of streamlining that and coming up with what we anticipate will be called Part 108, which is remote piloting. And we're looking at that probably somewhere in 2026 to be an actual law. We'll probably see what that looks like towards the end of the year and have a roadmap there. But so all of those things coming together, you have the regulations, you have the drone in the box, the equipment, the maintenance, the piloting. I still think that's benchmarked against the officer, and we're starting to see those things come together where it's ROI positive. And there's a couple use cases for this. They really shine in large open areas. They can move quickly. They can, patrol preventatively, much like a security officer would. You can also integrate technologies to trigger the drone, right? A camera, a photo beam sensor, something of that nature that can tell us there's something that needs to be investigated. And that's then when you really get the ROI. I mean, we're looking at and ballparking some things, for as a service model, you're looking around the $5,000 per month or less, and compare that to the security officer that may be $13,000 plus per month. And there's still some combinations of those things. I'm a big believer of blending people and technology and letting the technology do the heavy lifting, and then having high quality people respond and kind of handle that last mile piece. But with the drone in the box and the regulations coming together, that's why we're thinking now's the time to kind of jump into this, because we are seeing a positive ROI with it.
good segue into an integral part of this discussion, which is the training portion, right? You got to take everybody along with the journey. I think, Miriam, when we first spoke, we talked a little bit about town halls and getting people engaged. What's flying over my house? Why is it there? Tell me, Miriam, a little bit internally from a training perspective. Actually, we just spoke a couple of weeks ago. You're a big believer in training and education. You were taking a class in Boston, I believe. And so tell me how you take that important information and you distill it through your organization. How does that work from a training perspective?
When our program started, there were some questions from the officers, because that was totally no. We're gun-toting police officers. We're not used to flying a drone.
Right.
Where's our police car? Where's
Right.
our siren? So
Right.
the initial training had to start first from internally, making sure our officers understood the tool of DFR and what it was going to do for them as a safety measure, as a precaution. And it really was, it quickly caught on to where because we initially we didn't start 7 days a week, and we were only a few days during the week to kind of test it. And so soon it became, is UAS up? Is UAS up? We got the questions, and the officers really
Sure.
saw the need and the value for it. And we'd regularly do training. We train all of our officers to be visual observers as an additional safety measure, just to
Right.
make sure they can call out obstacles and for the DFR pilot that's flying. So our officers love it. We have 25 collateral duty UAS pilots. They get their Part 107 training. We do regular monthly training, 8 hours of training every month for all our collateral duty pilots. And we have a long list of officers that want to be on the team. And so
Sure.
the training is important, keeping our pilots engaged. We work with our SWAT team, we work with our K9 team, because we do have to integrate with not just DFR, but also our what we call tactical deployment, which is the field deployment, where officers will respond with the drones in the trunks of their cars. So for us,
Cool.
the training is important, and training the community, the same thing. We have our website has everything from the beginning of our program, the history, how we're using it, why we're using it, some success videos. In addition to the community can ask us questions. They can reach out. They can see when, where, why we're responding to a call. We only respond to calls for service. We're an agency that probably it's not going to use it proactively. We're not going to do random patrols because our community doesn't want that. And so we're going to continue to do just calls for service. When there's a call, when there's a need, we'll launch and respond with the drone.
Cool. Cool.
Let me just add a little bit to the ROI piece. I think it's
Please.
important. What we're seeing across the DFR programs, and I imagine this will be the same, it's relieving those officers of having the same number of patrol, is that we've seen 25% of the calls on average, the drone is able to return those ground units to service before they even arrive on the scene. So that's part of the ROI. Same thing with security officers. If you can do with less officers to patrol an area, that's where your ROI comes in. But I wanted to just make sure that people understand the program we've seen has done a number of things. One, it immediately increases the safety for everybody involved. That's the most important aspect for the responder as well as the people that are being protected. The second is it creates better operational effectiveness because you're making decisions with more information, things that you can't see from the ground. And third, it provides often a real-time situational awareness that helps you deal with things much more quickly than you would have before. And from a law enforcement standpoint, and maybe even in the security field, it has become one of the biggest de-escalation tools that they have in their toolbox.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Brilliant. Charlie, if you could just expand on one, we were talking training, and thank you for that nugget on ROI. I'm on the call. I own a security company. I'm in Florida, whatever that might look like. I'm certain the questions I'm going to get after this event. How do I get started? Where do I go? It's compelling. I get the case study. I want to be on the front end. Where does one go, and how do you initiate because you've got a very big organization? Are there some minimum requirements where you tell people, listen, if you want to play, please be aware of the following, or tell me how they can get involved? Is a better way of saying.
Yeah, so one of the things we have is one of the largest online resource centers. So you can go into the droneresponders.org. You can join. Membership is free. You can access the resource center, and we have starting a program folder. And it's applicable not only to public safety, but to anybody else because it goes through, it has guidelines and considerations if you're going to get into a program. So it's going to get into what type of opportunities are there to train. Is it private? Are you flying under Part 107? Are you flying under public aircraft operations. In most cases, these are going to be Part 107 for security operations. And now, as we're starting to see, what the next rule that comes out is going to be Part 108, which is beyond visual line of sight. So it's really knowing what those rules are. But one of the things we try to point out is that look at the technology, look at the mission that you're trying to accomplish, and make sure that you purchase the drone that meets that mission requirement. And that also includes the weather conditions. What are the weather conditions? What are the altitude requirements? Because if you fly in rural Montana in the winter versus Chula Vista all year round, the flights are different. The weather has a great impact on the battery life. So understanding those conditions, and one of the things that people don't realize is that over time you will spend more money on batteries than you will on the aircraft itself. So wow. It's these things to understand that you go into, so you get a chance to look through those guidelines and considerations. And then we see that the big thing that changes is people see it from a toy transition to a very valuable tool. And the question when it's not there is, where's the drone?
Yeah, so I would say why this is a perfect conversation at the time we're having it, notwithstanding the assassination attempt, which obviously drew some attention to it.
But let me add something else before I forget this. One of the things that's important, I know that Ryan's been talking about drone as a service and that kind of thing in the future, is that in some cases you may not want to do it yourself. It may be better, easier, and less expensive to go through a drone as a service, because you don't have to deal with training the pilots and maintaining an aviation culture, which is really important. And a drone for service can be done for multiple locations or multiple facilities, and you don't have to necessarily get into doing that. But you can see and use that as a gauge to determine if that makes sense for you to do yourself later. And, so one last thing, prisons have shown that them training pilots and doing it on a regular basis is not working, because they have such a transitory working force that it becomes difficult to maintain it. So for correctional facilities, a drone as a service may be the way to go.
Thank you for that, and it's a perfect segue into Ryan, which was Ryan. This is a two-part question. One is there any significant appetite for particular clients that you have or you're serving, or potential prospects, whereby they're mandating an American drone versus a Chinese drone versus so-and-so? That's question one. And then question two is to the drone in the box story and the service offering, which is now omnipresent in most solutions that we have. Gaining and keeping that expertise is going to be very costly, I would imagine. So if you can answer part one, and then part B is how do you plan to keep current and make sure you got the best current technology, most trained, and to Charlie's point, you're not subject to the failings of the turnover issue because you've outpaced that in terms of intellect and using the product.
Sure. Yeah, no, there's a lot there to unpack, in the sense of taking the first question of, the different products, and there is some discussion, and that's a whole rabbit hole we could go down in as far as the Chinese versus non. And it's not different what the security industry is dealing with now with the NDAA compliant, cameras and that type of thing. That's come up a lot in this conversation, and every customer is different. The FBI has banned, DJI is a Chinese-owned drone manufacturer. They have been around the longest. They have a phenomenal product. It works very well. It's probably the best priced product out there as well. I think, our car dealer who is looking for it as a service is less sensitive to it than a critical infrastructure partner who is unable to. So that conversation really comes down to the application and the customer comfort, because it's a very different scenario as far as cost and all sorts of things that are involved there. As far as the service model goes, that's where we've really decided to take this to market, is the complexities of these. We've done the research and followed what is needed to be done with this. And to your point, that is a never-ending process. Things are moving so rapidly. DJI came out with their first dock product, a couple years ago, and then followed it up with Dock 2 the next year. And Skydio the same way. Skydio has their X2 platform that's now being replaced by the X10. And so these things are moving at lightning speed, as are the regulations. There's maintenance. Chief Warner talked about batteries. There's, mandated maintenance of propellers, batteries, all sorts of things that change after flight hours. And so the as a service model is something that can kind of relieve that from the customer. And I think from the conversations we've had early adopters who are really interested in the technology, and we've had other folks that are using it to problem solve. You know, the guard's expensive, it's ineffective. What else do we got? Cameras can sometimes have gaps. That's one of the nice things about the drone. That customer is less interested in how the watch is made and more wants to know what time it is. So I think you kind of span those things, but I did in the drone as a service model, all the complexities and the different pieces that go in there. I recently put a white paper out that kind of talks through and breaks down each aspect of that as far as what costs are involved. What does it look like to do it yourself? What does it look like if you, use a third-party provider to do this as a service? So there's a ton of moving parts to it, but advantages and disadvantages to both.
Yeah, I think you articulated very well that this is not just going out and buying 12 cameras and sticking them on the side of a building. There's a lot more complexity in maintenance and training, et cetera. Miriam, we have lots of people in law enforcement and lots of owners of companies that come from that background. So they reach into like-minded people throughout their organizations. Any tips for them in terms of, hey, I'm excited, I'm going to go down and meet with my police captain next week. Tell me what that would look like and what they should be mindful of. Because I do believe that the nice part about our relationship, physical private security with law enforcement, is it's very tightly aligned. So we'd like to give them some solutions, and potentially, if you have any tips as to how to best engage folks with the knowledge that you possess, we'd love to hear.
And so just to make sure you are looking for input on as far as looking for how to start a program or engaging relationships.
Yeah, I think the engaging of the relationships, I think, is there most part. I think the next step, which is, okay, how do I go to the next Miriam in my county, in my community, and want to get them excited about doing what Miriam's done?
Oh, that's a great question. So we do host a lot of agencies, vendors who are curious as to how we got started, how we got to where we're at, and everything in between. And so I regularly tell agencies that come to see us, like, yes, we were the first, it was our crazy idea, but you need to do your research and your homework and go to other agencies, entities that are doing this and see what they're doing. Our model works for us. It doesn't necessarily work for everyone. And so do your research, do your homework. Don't just rush in and set up a launch location at the highest point in your city and start using a company. That may not be the best thing. You may want to do scale down, or you may want to be able to scale up. And what funding, you may get more funding. There may be some private community members that want to fund, and you have a foundation that they could, fund you through. So do your research. In law enforcement, we're really apt to helping each other, and even with private security, we all have the job that we're doing. We're doing it together to protect and either your community or the area that you're assigned to. And so do your research, reach out, because agencies, we want to help each other. And I don't see an agency not saying that they're going to help you or not open their door, or at least if they can't open their door for legal reasons, then at least talk to you via a conversation as to what their lessons learned were. So do your research. You need to get out there. You need to see what everyone's doing. And so we regularly will tell people, don't just come to us. Go to the number 2 agency that started DFR after coming to see us was Brookhaven, Georgia, Brookhaven PD. So we'll send people on the East Coast, hey, if you're closer and you can't afford to come out here to California, then go to Brookhaven. There's so many agencies, right, that are doing it. You have to do your research, and this is with anything with law enforcement. We reach out, we do our research, we find out from other agencies that are doing it, what they learn from, and then kind of figure out what's going to work for you.
Sure.
Yeah, let me add to that, is that the other thing we've seen really successful, which we've talked about, Jeff, on the security side, is we have a DFR working group. We have a number of different working groups. And what happens from that, we have all the agencies in there. And interestingly enough, there's a lot of things being shared with individual agencies by the FAA that are not the same for every agency. And so we're able to actually call them out on specific things and say, wait, this was allowed to happen in this community. Why can't we do it over here? And they usually come back and say, you can. And then we share it with everybody in the group. So I think the same thing would be true from a security aspect, is to have that working group of people that are in similar situations to talk about what works, what doesn't work, what are the unusual things that are happening in the FAA, and how can we deal with it.
Excellent. Ryan, what are you hearing from your insurance providers? What to look out for?
It's funny. That was a piece I forgot to mention in the last side. That is definitely a piece to consider. And, it kind of goes along in lines with what Chief Werner was saying with the early FAA's worry was these drones are going to fall out of the sky and hit people. And now that they've had enough flights and enough flight time to be able to look at that and have data to say, okay, that's not the case. It's very similar in the insurance side. That tended to be what some of their concerns were from the beginning. And honestly, now it's shifted to more of a privacy concern of, okay, how are you storing the images of what the drone is recording that's not on the property that you're hired to protect? And I know law enforcement runs into that as well. What are they looking at when the drone is on its way to a call? Those seem to be the things that the insurance companies are caring a lot more about than the drone, falling out of the sky type of thing.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Charlie or Miriam, in no particular order, but integration side. In other words, we're tying cameras, we're tying access control into GSOCs and into central station monitoring type services. Is that a thought? Are you doing it or you're not doing it? Is it an opportunity for expansion on what you're doing? Does it have value? I guess, Miriam, I could start with you.
As far as that, like integrating into like a Fusus type system, is that what you mean?
Yeah, any way that you would take that information other than in the field and offering that obviously as a complement to your police department on the field. What I'm saying is there a monitoring component that comes into your central station or into your major operations center that you're able to tether that camera feed and or actionable intelligence that comes that helps you deploy from it, as opposed to just in the field?
Right. And you'll see a lot of agencies now that are starting drone as first responder programs or some sort of drone program. They are integrating it into their real-time operations center, real-time crime center, real-time center, where all that information is feeding. So yes, you're starting to see that. We have a real-time, we call it an operations center. We feed everything in. We currently are using a software, Command Central Aware, and it feeds everything and integrates our drone software. We have the same vendor has our computer-aided dispatch. The same vendor. We also have license plate readers. So all that is fed in. Our crime analysts work in that real-time operations center, so they are there to kind of disseminate, filter, put it into a nice area where the officers can access. It's all connected together. Just the whole purpose is getting the officers the information they need so that they can have more directed, proactive enforcement. So it's not just randomly driving down a street where if there's an issue 3 blocks away, then we need to direct our enforcement that way. And so absolutely, yeah. And there's so many different, we're using Command Central Aware, but there's different companies that organizations can utilize to help filter, and that's a lot of information, and filter it into one place that it makes sense for the organization.
Yeah, brilliant. Charlie, people, obviously, whether that be with fire departments or law enforcement or other or private, what does that look like in your world? Where are you seeing who's connecting the dots?
Yeah, what I see next, the big thing is going to be the FAA's Part 108 rule with beyond visual line of sight flight, because that's going to dictate a couple different things. One, it's going to dictate, I believe, being able to fly beyond what you can see. But the second is it's going to be providing a little bit more cases on autonomy. How can you fly beyond visual line of sight with autonomous flights? Maybe it's one remote pilot for multiple aircraft, so that you can be actually doing things much more productively than you could by one person, one aircraft. We see that really important as to being able to cover larger areas and being able to do it with the least amount of people to be effective. And you could essentially have a large facility that has multiple drones that are flying their predefined mission paths that will not interfere with each other and will be a safe operation. And then if you start adding in artificial intelligence to that, we're seeing that next, of being able to identify in geolocated spaces that people aren't supposed to be. Or you can even use it for inspections of facilities to see, are there issues of conditions of the buildings, the rooftops, or anything else that may be a problem. So we're starting to see really a major change in the expansion of all this, as well as the potential of swarms. So you can imagine if you had a prison break, that if you could put up swarms of drones really quickly to cover a much larger area, and it's now using thermal, artificial intelligence, and everything else, you're starting to really bring it all together into a nice package.
Excellent. Ryan, you've been doing this already with your video monitoring business and your security officers. So you have a lot of familiarity with the connectedness, actually. And tell me a little bit about how this would mirror what you're currently doing and how you can see it accelerating with the use of drones.
Yeah, and it is becoming a thing very similar to remote video monitoring, where if you have several different cameras deployed at customers' location, one is Access, one's a Vigilon, one's Panasonic, you need that common pane of glass to pull all of this together into one interface. And we're starting to see that same kind of thing happen with the drones. Is if you're flying, Skydio or Nightingale or DJI, these are all going to have different interfaces. So we're starting to see those software platforms kind of develop and pull all of this information into a common platform. And it's very similar to the remote video monitoring world that we live in as well. But the integrations, and that's kind of what is exciting about it, is being able to use different things. In the law enforcement side, we're seeing ShotSpotter tied to a drone in a box solution, where it detects a gunshot, it flies directly towards it, and then you have eyes on, immediately. Sometimes the drone on the scene even before the call gets dispatched. So that piece of it is also kind of proliferating in the private sector, where we're using all these different technologies. But yes, the challenge going forward is how do we tie that all together into one common platform and make sense of it to the person that needs to take that baton and take action with it.
Charlie, will there be an opportunity? I mean, I think of schools, and I think, Ryan, you shared a very nice, intimate story about you and your grandfather and how that legacy affected your future growth plans. I look at schools two ways, right? The young aspiring student that's got the Astro drone at home, wants to know more and wants to be compelled to actually help people in the community, which Miriam, obviously, you're a big fan of in that outreach. What I think about a lot too is, as a kid, and I think I joked with Janine yesterday about when the law enforcement or fire department would show up when I was in the 3rd or 4th grade, and it was the stop, drop, and roll, whatever those days were that I enjoyed. Charlie, I would imagine schools would just seems like such a compelling value proposition. I came about, when I say I entered this industry, around the Columbine time. And so every year we say it's not going to happen again, and it does. How are schools utilizing it? How are we, and then to Miriam, I'll ask you about in terms of outreach, when you outreach in your communities, would there be an opportunity to use drones in a school setting that can help enjoy that? So starting with you, Charlie, tell me what educations and school departments are looking at.
Yeah, we're seeing a lot of STEM. We're seeing a lot of STEM programs come about. It's just happening organically, and we're starting to see a lot of it starting to grow in the whole workforce development mode. There is the design or the building of the drones. There is the operations of the software. There is flight training. So we're seeing a lot of that really starting to take place. And I will throw out an organization called AOPA, which is the Airport Operators and Pilots Association, I think. And they have a great deal, millions of dollars in available in STEM grants for schools to take advantage of. So check it out. It's for anybody who's looking for STEM. And what's interestingly enough is we're starting to see people interested in our departments because we have a drone program, which is kind of new. It's like when you're interviewing the process, you'll say, well, why do you want to come here? Well, one, you're progressive, you're innovative, great department, and you got a drone program, which is new. So that's kind of exciting. We're starting to see the kids today are expecting that kind of technology. They want to be involved in that kind of technology. And then we're seeing the transition of TAC, which is the ability to bring different technologies into one source. So we can see ground video cameras, drone video imagery, and GIS stuff all combined together to start seeing a picture, as Ryan was mentioning earlier. So it's really exciting, and there's a great deal of work being done all around the country. Not hard to find now.
Yeah. Miriam, how about you? I again, like I said, I just remember vividly waiting for that day that the law enforcement person would show up. And of course, that's when I was much earlier. As I got older, I didn't want them showing up. But at an early age, where you do that outreach in the public sector, what does that look like for you guys? And could drones be one of those topics that you guys address?
Absolutely. We regularly, and Charles mentioned the STEM programs. So all the schools have STEM programs, and so we regularly get inquiries and requests to have our pilots come and just explain to the students what what our program is. And it's usually STEM programs from the schools that are reaching out. And we are happy to do that because hopefully these students are going to, design and create something in the future that's going to really make the technology even better and help us with our mission of protecting the community. We have done tours at our police department, and I do think it has increased the interest for collaboration. We're really lucky here at Chula Vista. We have a great relationship with our community, but it can always be better. And so we've given tours to local community colleges that have Part 107 classes, and we've brought the students in just to see our operation. So we are
cool.
It's a great tool for a law enforcement agency to interact more with their community. When we had National Night Out event, which was a nationwide type thing that all agencies do to kind of stomp out crime in their organization. It's a great community outreach. And we always have our drone booth set up, and that's like one of our longest and most interested areas that people come to see, because they're really curious as to what we're doing and why we're doing it. So yeah, I think it's a great opportunity for agencies to collaborate with their communities and students and in the local schools.
I'll just say that, what was interesting is exciting thing really quick is that Blake Resnick, who started Brink Drones, was a 17-year-old student in school that after the Las Vegas shooting wanted to do something for public safety, and he developed a drone, which is now the biggest indoor drone flown. And one thing important we haven't talked about is indoor flying does not involve any FAA requirements. So if you want to do patrols of large area using drones, the FAA doesn't even come into the factor. So, but again, students making a difference, they're going to continue to do that for our future.
Wow. Are there, so I'll pivot to Ryan from a commercial application, and I didn't know that. Thank you, Charlie. I'm imagining, especially in the Midwest, there are some huge Amazon and other warehouses. Data centers are building up, obviously, at rapid proportion. Is there an application? I would imagine, I'm just thinking of temperature. I know Amazon uses the second most used drone organization, Amazon. Charlie can check me on that. But I would imagine their warehouses and safety would have to be an application for that. Is that a possibility for some of the people listening in?
Warehouses, perimeter protection. Chief Warner's not wrong. The indoor flying is not regulated. There's a company called Indoor Robotics that has a really great product that flies indoor missions. The challenges can be opening doors, and so they kind of shine in the warehouse space because it's wide open and they can move around. But they're doing some really interesting things in adding in the artificial intelligence side. We're seeing this on construction, where you can use the drone to be your security measure at night, and then during the day it can create 3D modeling maps and look at inventory levels and do grading and all sorts of different things that can serve dual purposes, but also pull from different budgets, right? It's not only going to fall on the security department to pay for these things, and so we're just seeing use cases in all sorts of different ways that we're able to use these things.
And we're seeing 3D modeling being used now in schools to be able to create the models that should something occur in the school, we can actually go to that 3D model and be able to travel down through the school in a way that we can understand where certain things are that might be described to us, like go down to room 10 and we can now see it. So that's the same kind of thing that can be done in a security setting, is that if you have that 3D modeling, it can be used if you have an incident to be able to see where to go.
Right. We're down to 4 minutes and counting. And one of the great attributes of this platform, and this is not a commercial, I'm just very fortunate with my 25 years. And one of the greatest assets is the generosity of our thought leaders. And that's inclusive, of course, of you three. Ryan's been on a couple, which really is the setup question to when the questions come in, and they will. I've tried to discreetly answer some of them, not so discreetly. But I will tell the people in the audience listening, obviously they can watch this afterwards at a future time. It'll be available in digital. But I know that you all will be available to them with all the appropriate acronyms and URLs. Ryan, I'm sure you're going to get a couple of calls, probably sooner than later, with regards to private security owners that want to kind of get a head start, which you obviously can provide. And in closing, Miriam, I was just wanted to close and say that other than thank you, is there any other things just in your mind's eye? You're the owner of a private security person. You want to approach your private, your public police captain in the next 30 days, 60 days, whatever that looks like. Are there events that they should go to? Are there websites or URLs that would help them facilitate the discussion about being a partner to their local law enforcement?
Well, all police agencies have a website and an interest link where you can reach out and ask questions and be directed to the right area and right person within the police department.
Right.
And police departments want to work with their communities and their organizations, so they would be happy. I believe they would be happy just to get the interest, and it may, you know, result in some a really great relationship that is beneficial and effective and great for the community. And so I'd say reach out to your local agency. They definitely want to work with the community
Right.
and want to hear. And you just never know. It may lead to another relationship that will be beneficial. But yeah, absolutely reach out. That's what we do. We work with the community. That's what we want to do. We want to keep that community partnership going.
Sure. Charlie, I know you gave out the responder, and people will be following you, I'm certain, with the 25,000 or thereabouts that you have following you on LinkedIn as an expert. Any other parting comments or resources? Again, like I said, I will repost information. This will be available to future folks, but any parting comments in terms of interested parties that were on the call today?
Yeah, just very quick. Anybody can join drumresponders.org. The best way to advance the technology is learning by others who've already led the way.
Right. Perfect. Ryan, anything else you want to share with our audience that you think would help excite them, whether that's with the upcoming Orlando GSX show or otherwise?
Sure. No, I would just echo, both Captain Foxx and Chief Werner, that this is a very collaborative community. It's one of the things that I've liked about being a part of it is everybody's willing to share, and I hope that translates into the private sector. I know we can sometimes hold our cards close to the chest as we're competing and different things like that. But no, happy to help. And like I mentioned before, we have a white paper on this that breaks down a lot of what are the costs, what are all of the things that are associated with a program like that. That you can get off my LinkedIn or from our website. But no, happy to share and collaborate.
Excellent. Well, again, thank you guys very much. I know we spent a lot of prep time, and you've been very thoughtful and generous with all of your feedback and your time. And I'm really privileged to be the host and hope our audience benefited from it like I know I did. So thank you all very much. I know I'll see you, Ryan, in Florida next month at GSX, where we'll have a pretty big booth and talk a little bit about extending the reach of us being the last mile, if I could put that commercial in. And Miriam, I hope your Giants have a good season. And Charlie, best with you as well. Thank you guys very, very much. Have a great afternoon.